Hey, excellent. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live interview. You never know what's going to happen, so stick around. And hello to those replay viewers who are going to watch this. So can't wait to introduce to you today's guest, whom I actually got to know through my wife, Jess Samuels. So shout out to you, Jess. Today's guest is a compassionate and analytical problem solver. Some say it's her superpower. She's an influential figure in the SaaS startup landscape and a pivotal player in transforming the customer experience. Having accrued 7 years of experience in the customer success world, she's an expert at navigating the often complex terrain of SaaS startups. Her portfolio is a testament to her hard-earned expertise, boasting profound knowledge in value-based selling, customer retention, and renewal. She's not just an expert in her field. She's a force of change and a symbol of compassion in the corporate world. Please join me in welcoming Jasmine Reynolds. Welcome, Jasmine.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So you are over there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is around the corner and a world away from Philadelphia. I can't believe how big this state is.
No.
So welcome. And as you know, this is a show about building strong networks, but the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Yes. So I think leadership is defined as someone who is a coach and a cheerleader. And for me, that has a lot of significance because I've actually coached dance and cheerleading for a combined about 15 years. So learning how to coach people in that leadership setting is extremely important, but also learning how to be their cheerleader when they're doing something phenomenal. I like to give the example of at a previous employer, we looked more at our strengths as opposed to focusing on people's weaknesses. And I thought that was just such a beautiful thing. So for me, it's about coaching and being that cheerleader.
I love that you brought in your experience with cheer. I saw that as one of the things you spent time doing, and I thought that's unique and different.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that would be a context for this. I also think that my background with a master's in social work, I also was trained to look for people's strengths. So that strengths-based perspective is sort of ingrained in me.
Yes.
And I don't really think about it anymore. To me, it just makes sense. But you're right. Like, it's not necessarily the default for most people. So when did you first start realizing you had some of these skills when it came to leadership?
I think my first experience with it was definitely with actually coaching cheerleading and dance. And it's something that I've always really been praised on. And I'm just like, okay, but it doesn't feel like I'm leading. And that's why I gravitated to it more, because it came so naturally. I am naturally a nurturer. I'm a mom of two, and being a nurturer is something that just feels good in my bones, right? So how that reflects in me being a leader is just like that empathy, that support, being that cheerleader, being that coach, and, not necessarily looking to fill gaps in terms of like their skill set, but more amplifying what they're really solid at. It has always been my approach, both as a coach and, and being a CSM. So I think once I realized in my professional life that I was really good at leadership, I was actually in pharmaceutical and medical device in that industry previously, and I created their CSM team. And I was able to hire, train, manage, and own a portfolio of work on my own. And it was such rewarding work because now, that I'm no longer there, those girls or those women were my successors. So it's really rewarding. And to further that, when I coached cheerleading, some of those girls a long time ago are now coaches themselves. So that
Legacy. I see legacy as being a big piece of your story as well.
For
Yeah,
sure.
the generations of cheer, and even within the workforce, being able
Mhm.
to train people who then, come up behind you and sometimes even surpass you in their abilities.
Exactly.
I'm curious what you were like, Jasmine, as a kid, like on the
Hmm.
playground and in grade school. Were you organizing your friends or kind of watching mostly? Did people see potential in you? Were you the first to raise your hands? What kind of kid were you?
I was not the first to raise my hand ever. I was very quiet and very shy and usually gravitated towards people who were like myself. And then once I found like other little shy girls or boys, and I'm just like, hey, be my friend. We can be shy together and awkward. So, yeah, I would say like not naturally a leader, but I would say my friends and even like growing up would say that I was definitely like the mother type, like that nurturing, like, so that quality has followed me in my entire life.
Hmm. It's funny, you said you're not naturally a leader, but yet you sought out other wallflowers and helped them organize into a community that made them
Exactly.
feel like they had a safe space, right? They weren't
Yeah.
alone anymore. They were together, shy
Mhm.
and awkward, but they were still together.
Still together. Yeah.
Was high school more of the same? Did you continue to feel more reserved in high school, or did you start to like find your own like voice in that space, or college? Like, where did that start to happen?
I think it started to happen probably a little bit more in high school, having been dancing and doing cheerleading, and I did musical in high school, and just making sure that like I always had different things to do with my friends. So if it was about like planning, I was usually in charge of that. Like, okay, like let's go to the park today, or we're gonna go practice. So yeah, I would say so. And even being like captain of different teams and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it started to show up a little bit more, even though I didn't really like ground myself in it at that age just yet.
You didn't seek it out, but it sounds like you also didn't turn down the opportunity to be the one organizing your friends, or to take
Right.
on the captain role on a cheer squad.
Hmm.
It's interesting to hear someone describe themselves as sort of shyer, and yet given the opportunity, you knew it had to be done, so you're willing to step up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely would. I was always comfortable with other people stepping to the forefront. But if someone were to say, like, give me the opportunity, or I saw that there was a gap that needed to be filled in terms of like being a captain or organizing something, I would always kind of step in, maybe more reluctantly, but like would want to do it. And like, okay, well, let's see. So yeah, and then I would also say that even professionally as an adult, I am now really figured out like, okay, this is, I love doing this. I love doing this part. I love leading. I love mentoring. Mentoring is something that I'm super passionate about. So, like, as a child, maybe I didn't really seek it. But at the same time, now I'm like, okay, give me more. This is like amazing. It's fuel for
I love
me.
it. Yeah. When you were in, like, I don't know, when you were like, let's say 12 or so years old, did you have a sense of what you were going to be when you grew up? Was there a clear path that you thought you'd be on?
That is so funny. So interesting enough, I thought I was going to be, I wanted to be a ballerina, but then I also wanted to be an astrophysicist until I learned how much math was involved. I was like, no, thank you. I'll just get me a telescope in the backyard and look. Yeah, no.
Yeah, ballerina or astrophysicist minus the math. Was
Minus the math.
college part of the plan all along, or did you go right to the workforce?
And so I did go to college. I went to college as a dance major. So disciplined in ballet. And I just thought that like that's what I was going to do. It's creative for me. And I loved that. Right. And then I was like, yeah, this isn't for me anymore. So I took some time away. I went into the workforce. I did a lot of sales positions. I actually started off in sales, and eventually went back and finished my degree because at that point I was like, okay, business is something that I'm really interested in, and it makes sense. So I eventually went back and finished my degree. But yeah, it's interesting because if I'd have finished then with a dance major, I don't know what I really would have done with it. So
Yeah, it must have been really hard to slip away, though. I mean, to get to the point where you're going to a college to really study this
Yeah.
dance form, and you're really competing at that level and working
Hmm.
hard, making a decision to step away when you didn't know what to step away to. So really
Right.
just trying to figure that out. How did you get into sales initially? Because I mean, for most people, it's like a
Mm.
four-letter word.
It
It's like,
really is.
but
Sales.
you
Yeah.
started in sales. Did you have any reservations, particularly given how you just described your personality?
What I've always leaned on in sales and which inevitably brought me to customer success is that I was a nurturer, right? So those relationships, and it's actually one of my personal core values, and that is relationships. And I was really good at sales because of the relationships that I was able to build. And I fell into sales because my dad was in sales. He's been a sales professional his entire life. And he's like, he calls me little one. He's like, little one, I think that you could do this. Like, I think you would be really good at this. Give it a shot. And I did. And I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it because of the relationships that I got to build with people. And then half the time it was like, okay, I get to build these relationships and then it's really easy to sell them stuff. So, like, this makes sense.
Yeah.
So when I stumbled across customer success, I was able to hybrid and magnify my ability to build those relationships and nurture those relationships in customer success, and also pull in a little bit of sales too. So,
You're had such an interesting start in that space, because
yep.
most people don't get sort of mentored into sales from someone who has a sales career.
Yeah.
So you already had a very different understanding of what sales was. One
Hmm.
of my earliest podcast interviews was a woman named Stephanie Chung,
Hmm.
and Stephanie was known as the high ticket sales closer. I will put the link in our show notes. But
Nice.
she got really good at high ticket sales because she was selling like private jets, and she
Wow.
was not a white man, and she was not a pilot. And we talked at length in that interview. It was one of my favorite, particularly because it was so early on. It was such a big
Mhm.
impact on me, about how all the tactics, all the sleazy sales tactics, if you hold them up and say, would you use that tactic to sell someone a private jet? It would help you understand what not to do and what you should
Yes.
do instead, because you don't spray and pray
Right.
the room with your business card and then sell a private jet, right? You don't
Exactly.
spam people and
Hmm.
then hope to like, it was just so funny. So it sounds like you got those lessons early about it being about the relationships, and it matched with your nurturing, sort of your sense of who you are, your personality, that fit
Hmm.
really well. What kind of sales were you doing, though? You said, was that pharmaceuticals initially?
So I got into pharmaceuticals later, but I started off actually in insurance, oddly enough.
Another
So
thing no one wants to talk about.
nobody
You
wants to
took
do
a
that.
hard one there.
Nobody wants to do that. Yeah, that's where I ended up. So yeah,
Anything after that's got to be easier, as I'm guessing.
anything after that's got to be easier. Pharmaceutical medical device was something that I got super passionate about. The first company that I worked for in that industry was a respiratory simulation company. And the way I like to think of it is we would make mannequins breathe. So we were training essentially respiratory therapists. And this is right, like I started working there a few years before the pandemic. And as you can imagine, there was a huge boom once the pandemic hit because we were trying to figure out how to treat people. So the reason why it got so important to me is like because there is an impact. Like while I am not those doctors, I'm not those respiratory therapists. Um, we have loved ones out there and making sure that they're taken care of. And it was really, really cool. And then I started working for a company that did medical trials for pharmaceutical medical devices, and it was amazing to me to see how many medical trials are happening right now, and that some of these could change our futures and change, lives, literally. So it was really cool.
You know, a lot of the folks that are listening to the show probably fall into the camp of entrepreneur.
Mm,
And one of the things we talk about in that world is just how you have to really believe in what you're selling.
yes.
And that's true for you as well. I mean, clearly there's a passion and you're describing it and you're like lighting up.
Yeah,
And, you know, if you didn't believe in it, you couldn't have done that. You couldn't have built those relationships if you weren't sure about the product. You
exactly.
mentioned customer success a few times. I know a little bit about what this is because my wife is interested in this as well.
Yes.
But for those of us who are not as knowledgeable of the inner workings of CX and CS, can you explain kind of what are these terms? What does it mean? And like, and what, how has this field kind of grown? Because it feels like it's something that's really evolved in the last 10 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. So essentially, what customer success is the post sale experience. So let's say you go through the sales pipeline and you're like, okay, I'm signing the contract, and now who's going to help me? Well, that's where a customer success person, and that's where we start to look at your customer experience. So a customer success manager is going to make sure that you are as successful as possible with the product or service that you purchased. And we are essentially your champions. We are your advocates. We are everything under the sun that you can possibly think of just to ensure that you're getting the most out of your purchase. And especially in this industry right now where it's hard to bring on new tech. It is hard to find the budget for things, right? For anything half the time. So if you're going to make that investment and you have a customer success person whose job it is to make sure that you get the most out of your purchase, it's a no-brainer. So really, my job is to make sure that other people are successful.
And how would it be different than like an account rep, or is there an overlap?
So I think an account rep would be someone who would facilitate the relationship during the sales process. A lot of CSMs will inherit that account after the contract is closed. So for me, example at User Gyms, I'm inheriting that account, and I'm taking them through the life of, as long as they're with us. So
Mhm.
renewals, expansions, technical support questions, onboarding, that's all under my umbrella, and making sure that you have everything that you need. Whereas I think when you're thinking of an account executive or an account manager, they're looking to always sell you on something. Whereas my goal is to bring value where it makes sense for you to continue to expand and renew.
Mhm. And I mean, hopefully the account person's also looking out for them. But yeah, it's a different, it sounds like
Mhm.
it's very similar, but yet it's like a slightly different focus. And
Right.
also if you aren't, if your focus isn't selling per se, but it's really about nurturing that account, then the
Exactly.
pressure's off about upselling and then everyone sort of feels differently about that. So
Yep.
that's interesting. I mean, yeah, it's, these are terms that are fairly new to me. And
Mhm.
I think that for those who are listening that, you know, they serve all these roles because they don't have a big community or
Yeah.
big team.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to think about, you know, these, we often talk about the like pipeline up until the sales conversation and then the
Right.
enrollment call, but then, you know, how do we serve people after that?
Mhm.
And when does it make sense to like invite them to the next stage or the next offering?
Yeah.
So I think there's some lessons to be pulled from the work you're doing in the corporate world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you touch on a point there. Thinking about like support. I think customer success is more about a proactive as opposed to a reactive approach. And that's something that I had to do at my previous employer where we were always putting out fires. And that was it. There was no reactive or proactive. I'm sorry. There was no proactive conversations about strategy and how do you get more out of it and how do you expand with other people using this device. It's not just respiratory therapists. Nurses should know how to use this device because we can be practicing on um, anything, right? So
Mm,
even though this one department, the respiratory therapy department, was able to find the budget for this, there are about 10 other departments that could be utilizing this, and that's where we start to have those strategic conversations. So more than just like support and reactive, but proactive for them to get the most out of it.
I can see how having multiple people to focus on these different aspects of the journey that the customer is having is helpful,
Mhm.
because if you're busy like delivering a service,
Right.
it's hard to, if you're busy delivering slash putting out flat fires,
Mhm.
there may not always feel like there's time for the proactive conversation.
Exactly.
And yeah, having someone else who's able to sort of piece things together and say like, oh, wait, these other departments would also benefit. I think it's interesting because I do feel like often we are a little short-sighted as entrepreneurs about how we can serve.
Mhm.
And, we get hired for one particular thing and we keep searching for new clients.
Mhm.
But once you have a connection with a client, like how else might you serve that client as opposed to taking that one service or product and then keep finding new markets. You have been, I feel like you've had the ups and downs of being in the tech world.
Mhm.
I know that there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions and layoffs and,
A lot.
reskilling. How has that impacted your journey as you progressed from, where you started in, I guess, the insurance side of things, and to where you are today with user gyms?
Yes. So I think the biggest thing that I've learned over the last couple of years is that. So let me take a step back. So when I was at Ingmar Medical, like I said, I built the team. I remodeled the approach from being reactive to proactive, and that was amazing. And I actually made the decision to step back as a manager and to be an individual contributor again. And I took on the title of Senior Customer Success Manager. And that meant for me, it was giving me the opportunity to broaden my skills and learn a little bit more, especially going from being in pharmaceutical into SaaS and tech. I wanted to learn a little bit more before I went back and put that hat on as a leader, because as a leader, I feel like it's important for me to know as much as I can to be able to support my team, right? So I think in this industry right now, yes, it is challenging. I was laid off from, so there was a company in between that I was at, and I was laid off. And a month later, I started at User Gems, which was an amazing opportunity. And especially in this climate, it was extremely difficult. I know how blessed and lucky I was to get that opportunity so quickly, and at such an amazing company as well. But I would say that you have to constantly be willing to pivot at any given time, and just making sure that you're staying up on your skills. And like thinking back, I'm proud of myself for making the jump to go from leader manager to individual contributor again, because I knew that's what I wanted to do. But it was extremely scary to do it. So I would encourage others, like, don't be afraid to step back, polish your skills so that you can get to the next level. Um,
Was that shift from sort of the leader role to the individual contributor role as you're shifting from one industry to another?
yes. Yep.
So is that as you join the SaaS world is
Yes.
basically? Yeah.
Yes.
So I can see how, while you had the leadership skills in one arena, you wanted to make sure you truly understood the product, the community, the culture before you took that role again.
Yes.
And you found it helpful and helped you like retool and really build up those skills a little bit more.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 What's different about working in a SaaS environment compared to what you were doing with pharmaceuticals or insurance? Like it feels to me like they feel like very different models. There's no, I don't know, it's not a product like before you were talking about, the thing that you
Like
did with the
the goal.
respiratory, and it was like a
Mhm.
thing, and here
Mhm.
like SaaS, it's software as a service. So,
Mhm.
how do you conceptualize that?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest change is that one thing, I'll start with what I've kept consistent, and that I've kept consistent keeping the relationships first, that person to person, human to human connection that has always remained first on everything that I've ever done. Relationships are very important to me. But in terms of what I'm doing on a day to day, it is definitely much more technical. And knowing, the ins and out of the software and making sure that I'm up to date on all of the technology and stuff like that. So that's a beast on its own, especially for me, I feel like. So I think also, what's been different is how do I articulate this? Is the speed and change of
Mm,
everything. I mean, going from fairly bigger size companies, not huge, but like bigger, maybe smaller on Ingmar Medical. But anyways, with this company being a tech startup, things are changing like this. And it's like, okay, it was just this an hour ago, and now we have this brand new feature, and now I have to learn it. So, learning how to remain organized and knowing where to find stuff and who to go to find it if you can't find it, and just keeping on your toes. It moves so fast, so fast. That's the biggest difference, I think.
yeah. So have you organized like a group of people who are doing similar work to like get to know them? Like how do you start to build a new network each time you shift? It's like how long have you been part of the SaaS world now?
I have been less than a year, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in pharmaceuticals for about 6 or 7 years and then moved over here. But how do I broaden my network
Mm-hmm.
in this industry? I actually made a post about this on my LinkedIn. I slide in DMs. I'm like, hey, hi guys, Jasmine here. Be my friend, teach me things, and I will share any knowledge that I have. So, not being afraid to just start conversations with random people, and finding a voice. So, what the one thing that I latched on in this industry is champion like engagement and tracking, because you've done the work to create that champion, that really healthy relationship where that person loves your product or service and they're like, this is fantastic. And then that person that you built that relationship now moves on to another company, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that was good while it lasted. No, keep that relationship, because now that they're at the new company, they may need your product or service over there, and now that's a new opportunity. That's a new sell. So it's a fruit that keeps giving. The work that you put into your champion is something that you'll see moving forward for the next several years and several job changes after that, because as we know, people are moving around, they're leaving jobs, they're getting laid off and going in new places. So these are changes that you should really facilitate and try to scale as much as possible, because you already did the work.
Yeah. So the champion in this case, that's the internal person who really helps you make the case to make the budget, like to allow you to do whatever work you're trying to do,
That's
and
exactly right.
smart to like stay in touch with those kinds of relationships. I imagine LinkedIn then is your friend because you can
LinkedIn's my
track where
friend.
people go.
Yes,
Yeah,
LinkedIn is my friend.
yeah, because I can imagine, before, someone's email would change, and the only way you had to reach them was their work email.
Hmm.
So if you connect with people on LinkedIn, like soon in the relationship, you'll stay in touch even if they leave that role. That's really interesting. Are there any other, like I'm always curious as people building up new networks like you've had to do as you shifted into the SaaS world,
Hmm.
or if you're trying to think about how to nurture and sustain connections to people that you've known maybe 5 years ago, and suddenly maybe now is the time to reach back out to them. Like any habits, philosophies, or practices other than sliding into DMs that help you sort of nurture and sustain those connections?
Yeah. So with UserGem specifically, the software is essentially that champion tracking, right? So depending on the size of a company, you can do this on your own. But if you're trying to do it at scale, that's exactly what UserGems does. We look at your contact list and we tell you where your champions, users, customers, anybody have moved to, and that's what we do for you. But if I'm doing that on my own from my personal network, I think it's more about trying to stay on a certain cadence with people, like just saying like, hey, checking in quarterly if it's on a personal, because that's a lot of work, right? Like quarterly, just to say, hey, how's it going? Or even if it's participating on their posts on LinkedIn as well, just to stay up on like what they're doing, what they're talking about. You know, when we join a new company, they're usually, if you're connected, they're going to say like, oh, I'm, grateful to say that I've moved on to Pepsi, and yeah, I'm really excited for this role. So you jump in there and you're like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Congratulations. Let's get coffee and catch up or something like that. So that's what I would do on a personal level. But if I'm thinking about it from a scalable business level, User Gems is exactly what it is.
Yeah, I didn't know much about User Gems before learning about the work you were doing, and I did see a lot of potential there as organizations get bigger and it becomes more cumbersome to keep track of these things.
Yeah.
I think that's really important because, like you said, you invest so much in the relationship early on. Like you should be able to reap benefits and dividends as it goes, and it's two ways. They also would rather hire a vendor that they already know,
familiar with. They know.
They would rather hear from you than like get pitched by random people that they have to vet and they're not quite sure and all that stuff. So I could see the benefit, and I wonder about that because I also see, if you could speak to this, I also know some people who are reluctant to like continue those relationships if it's been a while because they feel like they're bothering people, or I mean, this is sort of like the people feel bad about sales, right? Like, like I'm bothering people or I'm begging, and it's like, but how do you mentally help people get past that angst?
One approach that I've used personally, where I'm like, okay, I'm reaching out to a complete stranger or someone that I haven't talked to in a really long time. I like to go into the conversation with an offer, or an ask and an offer, right? So I'm asking you like just to join my network and just participate in, some of my posts, or maybe I have a question about the company that you work for or something like that. And then my give that I would, offer them, I would say something along the lines of, actually, I have an example for you. So I went to this conference about 3 years ago now, maybe 2. And I was looking at the panelists, and I'm like, okay, there was this a Black woman on the panel, and I was like, oh, and a girl that looks like me, like exciting. All right. So I reached out to her on LinkedIn, and I said, hey, I see that you're, talking about this topic coming up for this this conference. Really excited to hear about it, and I would love to pick your brain about the company that you work for. Would you be willing to grab coffee with me during, the conference time at some point? And I just want to give you a familiar face in the audience. And that actually resulted in a job offer later. So, yeah, I
have to just say, you're Jasmine. I will repeat everything good that you just did, but I want to anchor this in you are a shy, reticent personality. Right? You are not the gregarious, see me, front of the room person.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, what you just described was actually super strategic. If you don't have the energy to meet everyone in the room, which no one actually can do that thoughtfully, this is a way you like looked at the list of people who were speaking. That's all public information, right? You found a connection with one of them that you thought would be particularly interesting to you and perhaps even them. And you reached out thoughtfully, like, I'm really looking forward to that topic. I would love to connect to the conference. The only thing I would change is the pick your brain phrase, because we're all kind of like, oh God, my brain, like, please stop picking at it.
Yeah.
But other than that, they're like, hey, I'm going to be at the conference. I am going to be a friendly face in the audience. If there's a chance, I'd love to meet up for coffee while we're at the event. Like, I have to like, as a presenter, because I'm often on that side of things, if someone
Yeah.
does that, it is so memorable because it's so rare that
Yeah.
people reach out ahead of time. And I mean, I've had people like send me connections on LinkedIn and I don't know
Hmm.
why.
Hmm.
And then after I realized they were in the room and they didn't
Yeah.
even tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I'm like, you connected before the event, but you didn't send me a note and
Because
you
I would have
didn't.
said hello, right? Yeah.
Right. Like that would have been nice to have a
Yeah.
friendly face in the audience. And I love having lunch with people. Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
So how do you, I mean, it feels like that's a natural extension of how you now feel about sales, that networking has become easier for you.
Mm-hmm.
But was that also a shift? Did you have to get over any like angsty feelings around
Oh
networking?
yes. Oh yes. Just stop. We talk ourselves out of it. I think most of the time we think people are going to be annoyed by us reaching out. But I would say probably 90, 80% of the time, people don't mind. I know I don't mind. If someone were to say, like, hey, can you catch up for coffee? Or um, you work for User Gems, can we talk about it? What do you think? How do you like it? I see you used to work for Medrio. What are your thoughts there? We have the only way that we get better is to share our knowledge, and we
Mm,
have to understand that most people are going to feel that way too. And the worst that can happen is you get ignored or a no. Did it
yeah.
kill you? Sure didn't. Why not?
Yeah. You're making me think about my wife's journey. She was the director of residence life
Hmm.
and at a university and wanted to
Hmm.
make the shift into ed tech. And
Okay.
when she started doing that job search, she found people at ed tech companies who had a higher ed res life background
Yep.
and reached out and said, I'd love to hear more about that journey.
Yep.
Could you help me understand, like, how did you make that shift? They
Yep.
all said yes. She was, I would say she was a little reluctant at first, right? Because it's a little like,
Yeah.
I'm just asking random
It's
people.
scary.
By
Yeah.
the third yes, she was like gamifying it. She was
Yeah.
like, okay, how many a week can I reach out to? And
Yep.
then, she had the call on Zoom. And then and this is pre-pandemic. So like the fact that she knew how to use Zoom and could easily get them on a call was all kind
Yeah.
of, she made it easy. And she'd send them a $5 gift card to like Starbucks electronically
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, like, have
Mm-hmm.
coffee on me. Sorry, we couldn't actually have coffee in person. But
Yep.
then those are the people who grabbed her application and put it on the top of the pile and like looked for it and,
Exactly.
forwarded it along and, told her like the lay of the land of the culture and all the stuff that you just don't know when you're applying. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the connection to higher ed and to particularly to res life that made them want to connect with her. And to
Exactly.
you as a woman of color in the world of tech, I can see that being a really strong connection.
It
Like being
is.
a woman at all, but particularly a woman of
Right.
color, it would be like, oh yeah, let's connect. We have to have each other's back.
Yeah. Have to. You have to. You have to be willing to share that knowledge. And I know, like, getting into this and coming out of sales and the journey that I've had, I'm like, how many people can I help? There's a lot. Let me just say that there's a lot in my DM right now, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, how do I spread myself, to get everybody? But I do my best. I do my best, and it might be delayed, but it will happen.
I'm curious how being on podcast shows fits in. It's been a while since I've had someone who still works in the corporate space on
Yeah.
my show. And the last time they were in a conference room with a lawyer next to them.
Oh gosh.
I know. I reached out to her
It's
because she
not
wrote something awesome
intimidating.
about networking. And I was like, oh, I want to highlight that. That was really cool.
Yeah.
And like their legal got all like, ah. And so I was like, that's fine. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about how you're sort of building your own personal brand as well as serving whatever, SaaS products you're currently working with.
Yeah. So building my personal brand has been something that has been really important to me for the past, I would say, 5 or 6 years. It's been a slow build. It really has very slow build because I'm just like, what do I talk about? and what do I stand for, and what is really like impactful, because there's so many voices in this industry right now. Customer success, SaaS, all of these things, right? Like everybody's talking about it. And how do I set myself apart? And what I had to realize about my brand is that the thoughts and things that I had to say about these topics, while at the baseline may be the same as others, no one's going to talk about it or think about it the way that I do. So don't be afraid to be a repeat or like an echoing voice. Like, you are different. Your way that you perceive it or the way that you approach something is going to be different than anybody else. And your voice is important as well. So I am not not a public speaker. I have convinced myself, let me rephrase that. I've convinced myself that I'm not a public speaker. I've convinced myself that I'm this shy person, right? And I'm like, well, I'm still going to go do this. It'll be fine.
Well, and I'm sure it does get better and easier
Yes.
as you do it. And
it does.
you know, this, by the way, speaking on podcasts is a stage. It's a chance for you to tell your story and to work out like what's important, what's a highlight. So we tell people all the time, it used to be really hard to get on stages, but now people can host their own events. They can get on people's podcasts. They can host their own shows. This is all opportunities to kind of get the reps in as you do these things. And then you sort of figure out your unique value to the topic and share that along. But it also sounds like your own mindset has really been developing around sharing who you are, connecting with people. Strangely, I feel like sales was how you got started, and usually for everybody else, they have to like get around to the point where sales is finally okay. But you were like, well, this is what you do for sales, so this is how you build your career. This is how you build your brand. Yeah. So interesting. I imagine your dad, who called you little one, is very proud of what you've been able to do.
He is very proud. Him and my mom, they are literally my biggest fans. They know nothing about customer success. My dad knows a ton about sales and being in the professional world. And they will watch if I have like a webinar or podcast and stuff like that, they will watch. I'm like, oh, guys, you're awesome.
Man, having that kind of support at home is wonderful. The family of origin being there to cheer you on as you're, developing your own career. This has been really awesome. And as we're winding down the interview, I'm really looking forward to hearing your answer to my last question, which we'll hear right after this break. All right, here is the final question. Let's say it's a year from now and we are still connected, which I hope is true. And I'm catching up with you and I'm asking you, hey, what's been going on? What are you celebrating right now? I want to know what we're going to be toasting a year from now. What are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
The thing I am most looking forward to is having presented a topic at a conference live in front of a big audience. That would be the milestone for me for the year, for sure.
That's amazing. I cannot wait to help you celebrate that.
Yes.
That's amazing. Are you familiar with Toastmasters?
I have heard of that.
I'm going to be yet another person who tells you to look into it.
Okay.
It's all about developing how you speak on a stage.
Okay.
And there's chapters all around the world. Like Toastmasters is a great resource. We'll put a link in the show notes for everyone listening as well. But I'm a professional speaker. I'm part of the National Speakers Association, which is more about the business of speaking. So people who like develop that into their own thing. But Toastmasters a really big overlap between the two. People who start out just getting comfortable on stages. But yeah, that's one way to do it. And then just pitch yourself, just put yourself out there like you've been doing for everything else.
Yeah. I mean, all I can get is a no, right?
Yeah. So what are the best ways people can find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn primarily. That's where my biggest voice is. Find me on LinkedIn. It's Jasmine C. Reynolds.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll put that link in the show notes.
yes.
Fantastic, Jasmine. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. It's a
Yes.
unique opportunity. It's been a while, like I said, since I've had a chance to have a conversation with someone who is really working within a company, a large
Mhm.
company, and has had the experiences of moving around between different industries and all the skills you've learned around networking and sales. It's very applicable to the world of entrepreneurship because you're
Yes.
really taking a very entrepreneurial approach to all of this and how you're managing your own career. So really appreciate you being here and sharing
Absolutely.
your story with all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was awesome.